Imagine your dream wedding turning into a literal nightmare, doused in an unthinkable horror. One man, pushed too far by HOA tyranny, found the ultimate, most disgusting way to reclaim his property. You won't believe what happens when a lavish ceremony meets a hidden, foul surprise. Don't miss this epic tale of suburban revenge and the explosive moment everything went wrong. This is not a suggestion. Mr. Marshall, this is a directive. Your non-compliance is an affront to this community. The words, delivered with chilling authority by Karen Delacroix, didn't just pierce the morning air. They felt like a physical invasion, echoing the incessant assault on Jake Marshall's sanctuary. Karen, the self-appointed queen of Twin Oaks HOA, stood on his porch like a conquering general, her designer suit a stark contrast to the quiet rebellion brewing within Jake. Her clipboard, a symbol of her suffocating regulations, seemed to thrum with a petty, bureaucratic power she wielded without mercy. Jake met her gaze, a deep, unsettling calm warring with a simmering fury he rarely allowed to surface. This wasn't just about HOA dues or manicured lawns. This was about the very soul of his independence. A quiet life brutally interrupted by an insatiable hunger for control. His grandparents' house, a sturdy, comforting presence in the suburban sprawl, had been his refuge. It was a place steeped in history, where the scent of old books mingled with the faint aroma of his grandfather's pipe tobacco, a tangible connection to a past unburdened by Karen's petty tyrannies. Jake had intentionally chosen a life detached from the performative perfection of Twin Oaks, refusing to join the HOA that had sprung up long after his family had laid roots. He paid his taxes, maintained his property, and asked for nothing more than to be left in peace. Karen, however, saw his autonomy as a personal challenge, a defiant stain on her meticulously curated canvas of conformity. His quiet solitude was a direct insult to her reign. The initial skirmishes had been a slow, insidious creep of annoyance, condescending notes about a single fallen leaf, absurd citations for his grandmother's beloved rose bushes daring to droop slightly, even a bizarre demand to paint his perfectly respectable mailbox HOA-approved beige. Jake had dismissed them, filed them, or, in moments of exasperated politeness, dispatched curt replies affirming his non-membership. He knew his rights, understood the limits of an HOA's reach, but Karen's tactics grew bolder, more insidious, fueled by a relentless, almost pathological need to dominate. She dispatched her minions, busybodies like Mr. Whitaker, who pretended to be friendly while subtly probing for weaknesses, to report on his every perceived transgression. The air itself seemed to crackle with her resentment, an invisible noose tightening around his cherished independence. The turning point was not a single event, but a series of calculated provocations that culminated in a brazen act of contempt. Jake first noticed the strange vehicles, too numerous for casual visitors, parked for hours along the street bordering his property. Then came the surveyors. Their equipment pointed not at the vacant lot they claimed to be measuring, but squarely at his expansive, private yard. A cold, heavy dread began to settle in his stomach. He dismissed it, then pushed it away, clinging to the fading hope that it was merely another instance of Karen's overzealous interference, not something truly sinister. Then, the flyer, not in his mailbox, but taped, almost defiantly, to his gatepost. It was elegantly printed, emblazoned with the HOA logo, and announced, with an almost sneering flourish, the upcoming wedding with Chloe Delacroix, Karen and his daughter. The venue, the grand lawn at Twin Oaks. Jake's blood ran cold. There was no grand lawn, not unless Karen, in her breathtaking arrogance, had unilaterally decided his private property, his sanctuary, was to become the stage for her daughter's theatrical display. He remembered her dismissive wave of a hand, her chilling declaration during an unsolicited lecture. Honestly, Jake, this whole area really feels like shared community space. It's just so much more than one person needs. The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement. The idea that his legal deeded property was merely an unused asset to be appropriated for her grand designs ignited a slow-burning fuse within him. A week before the dreaded date, the fuse reached its igniting point. Jake stepped out, a quiet morning ritual of retrieving his newspaper, when his gaze snagged on something subtly wrong with his old wooden side gate. It was always secured with a heavy, unyielding padlock. Now a faint, almost imperceptible scuff marked the latch. He moved closer, his heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The lock was gone. Not broken, not forced, but replaced. An identical lock, but inferior, a flimsy imitation of his robust security. Someone had cut his lock, gained entry, and then had the gall to replace it, believing he would never notice. It was a violation so profound, so utterly contemptuous of his privacy, that it stripped away the last vestiges of his patient calm. He imagined the clandestine entry, the surreptitious planning, the whispered instructions for tables and chairs and tents to be erected on his property. Karen's words, dripping with condescension, echoed in his mind the grand lawn at Twin Oaks. His lawn, his inheritance, his private, legally protected space, now utterly desecrated by her imperial decree. The rage that had been a distant hum now roared to life, a silent, all-consuming inferno. He was a man of quiet resolve, but this was a trespass too far. This was war. As he walked back inside, the cheap replacement padlock still clutched in his trembling hand, a plan began to unfurl in the darkened chambers of his mind, a plan as audacious, as unspeakable, and as deeply satisfying as Karen's transgression was infuriating. The days leading up to the wedding became a suffocating ballet of brazen intrusion. Each delivery truck, every meticulously placed floral arrangement, a fresh stab at Jake Marshall's dwindling patience. He watched, a quiet, almost surgical fury burning behind his calm facade, as his once private backyard transformed into a grotesque mockery of a grand venue. Massive white tents, billowing like sails on a manicured ocean, eclipsed the sun, casting his home in a perpetual, unwelcome shadow. The incessant rumble of generators, the high-pitched whine of power tools, and the ceaseless chatter of contractors desecrated the tranquil silence he had cultivated for years. It was as if his property had ceased to be his own, becoming merely an unacknowledged stage for Karen Delacroix's grand, theatrical performance, an egregious easement for her daughter's matrimonial fantasy. He saw Karen almost daily, a blur of expensive fabric and imperious gestures, a conductor orchestrating her symphony of entitlement. She moved with an air of unassailable authority, her voice, when it carried over the fence, sharp and demanding, directing caterers, berating florists, and micromanaging every single detail. She never once approached him, never offered a single word of explanation or apology, not even a cursory nod. It was a calculated silence, a dismissive arrogance that shrieked louder than any shouted insult, proclaiming, without uttering a single syllable, "Your rights don't matter. Your boundaries are irrelevant. My will is absolute." The audacity was breathtaking, a masterclass in psychological warfare designed to demoralize and defeat, to grind down any shred of resistance until a person simply accepted their fate. Jake, however, was not demoralized. He was meticulously planning, his mind a labyrinth of calculations and chilling contingencies. His family had lived in this house for generations, and with that inheritance came a deep, almost innate understanding of its quirks, its hidden secrets, and the peculiar engineering marvels his eccentric grandfather had left behind. The house stood on a surprisingly large, irregular plot, a remnant of an older subdivision plan that had somehow escaped the cookie-cutter uniformity of Twin Oaks. And beneath the sprawling lawn, hidden beneath years of undisturbed topsoil, lay a complex, redundant underground irrigation system. It wasn't just for watering, it was a testament to his grandfather's visionary, almost paranoid, preparedness. This wasn't merely a network of PVC pipes. It was an elaborate arterial system designed to draw water from multiple sources the municipal supply. A deep, long-abandoned well, and crucially, a massive, buried septic holding tank from a decommissioned guest house. The septic tank. That was the key. It was a long-forgotten detail. A piece of local lore known only to a few, including Jake, who had stumbled upon the old blueprints tucked away in a dusty attic trunk. The tank, originally designed for emergency gray water storage from a guest house that had been torn down decades ago, had never been fully emptied. It was a forgotten reservoir, a ticking time bomb of forgotten effluent, a silent, putrid testament to a past generation's pragmatic foresight. A discreet, manual valve, located within his garage, connected this dormant beast to the main irrigation line, a secret conduit to a catastrophic, yet profoundly satisfying. Deluge. His mind worked with the chilling precision of a seasoned engineer. Every thought a cold, hard piece of logic. He spent his evenings hunched over those faded blueprints, tracing the intricate web of lines, confirming connections, cross-referencing valve diagrams with the physical reality of his garage. The smell of aged paper and latent mold filled the air, a sensory backdrop to his escalating resolve. During the day, he observed the wedding preparations with an almost detached, scientific curiosity, noting every detail, the exact layout of the main tent, its perimeter, the placement of the ornate dance floor, the precise locations where the caterers set up their elaborate, sparkling food stations. He saw the shimmering silks, the crystal glassware glinting in the intrusive sunlight, the cascades of freshly cut flowers that smelled of expensive perfume and impending disaster. He saw Chloe, the bride, a whirlwind of nervous energy and entitled demands, shrieking at a florist about the wax shade of ivory ribbon, her face contorted in a petty rage that mirrored her mother's. She was Karen's daughter, through and through, a younger, more volatile version of her mother's imperious nature, and the sight of her spoiled histrionics only hardened Jake's resolve. The more he watched, the more justified his plan felt. This wasn't just about reclaiming his property from a blatant act of trespass. It was about reclaiming respect, about delivering a message that resonated beyond the manicured lawns and forced smiles of Twin Oaks, a message that would echo in the annals of suburban legend. The neighborhood, meanwhile, was a buzzing hive of gossip and clandestine observation, where Whitaker, the elderly neighbor whose nose for scandal though was as sharp as his camcorder's lens, was a constant, almost spectral presence. He would ostensibly be tending his prize-winning hydrangeas, but his small, ever-present camcorder would be, subtly, almost imperceptibly, pointed at Jake's yard, capturing every new addition, every new humiliation inflicted upon Jake. He had been a sympathetic ear for Jake, a quiet, knowing ally in his long-standing skirmishes with Karen. "She's gone too far this time. Jake," he'd murmured one afternoon, his voice barely a whisper, as a massive delivery truck unloaded a ridiculous ice sculpture shaped like intertwined swans. "That's private property. She just took it, right out from under you." Mr. Whitaker, a keen observer of human folly and an early adopter of internet trends, had confided in Jake that he'd created an anonymous Reddit account dedicated to documenting HOA absurdities. Jake knew this, and a small, almost imperceptible, cynical smile touched his lips. The internet, he mused, had a long memory and a potent, insatiable thirst for schadenfreude. Mr. Whitaker's quiet surveillance felt less like voyeurism and more like a benevolent, if somewhat eccentric, act of documentation for posterity. The day before the wedding dawned, clear and bright, a perfect canvas for disaster. The final touches were laid, the decorations shimmering under the morning sun. The air thrummed with a nervous, electric anticipation. Jake's lawn was now utterly unrecognizable, a sea of pristine white fabric, twinkling fairy lights, and extravagant floral arrangements. He watched, hidden behind his kitchen curtains, as the wedding party, dressed in their finest, arrived for a rehearsal dinner under the grand tent. He saw Karen, radiating smug satisfaction, accepting congratulations from early arrivals, her face alight with the glow of absolute victory. She looked utterly triumphant, completely oblivious to the silent storm gathering around her, the foul, unseen vengeance lurking just beneath the surface. Later that evening, as darkness finally fell and the last of the crew had packed up and left, the neighborhood quieted, save for the distant hum of the caterer's chillers. Jake made his move. He didn't need to trespass. His control panel for the irrigation system was located, as it always had been, in his garage, a discreet metal box tucked behind a cluttered workbench, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. He opened it, the metallic clang echoing softly in the cavernous space, revealing a dizzying maze of wires, pipes, and old-fashioned brass valves. His fingers, steady and deliberate, located the small, unmarked valve connected to the long-dormant septic tank. It was stiff with disuse, resisting his initial efforts, but with a grunt and a twist of his wrist, he slowly, methodically opened it. A faint, sickening gurgle echoed in the pipes below the ground, a sound no one else could hear, a grotesque prelude to the impending deluge. The system, his grandfather's ingenious design, was built to pressurize slowly, to distribute water evenly across the entire lawn. He set the timers for precisely 2:30 p.m. the following afternoon. Just as the vows would be exchanged, just as the celebration would reach its crescendo, he made sure the system was set to activate all zones, ensuring the noxious spray would drench every inch of the grand lawn, including the area directly under the main tent, the dance floor, and the expensive catering stations. He closed the panel, the click echoing with a profound sense of finality, a silent period to his grim resolve. He went to bed that night, not with the restless energy of a man on the brink of chaotic revenge, but with a profound, almost spiritual sense of peace. The calm, independent rhythm of his life had been shattered, violated, and trampled upon. But tomorrow it would be restored, in a manner so undeniably, viscerally permanent, so utterly unforgettable, that no HOA vice president would ever dare to cross his boundaries again. He thought of Karen's smug face, Chloe's entitled shrieks, and the pervasive air of self-important entitlement that permeated Twin Oaks. He thought of the decades of quiet, undisturbed life in his grandparents' home, of his rights being trampled underfoot with such blatant contempt. He thought of the foul, putrid water, waiting patiently beneath the pristine lawn, a silent, unseen witness to his calculated retribution. The justice, he realized, wouldn't just be poetic, it would be undeniably, spectacularly, and pungently delivered. The morning of the wedding was, to all outward appearances, a picture of suburban perfection. The sun climbed high, casting a golden glow over Jake's transformed lawn, which now gleamed with the polished facade of a grand event space. The white tent billowed gently in a light breeze, its interior undoubtedly resplendent with Karen's chosen opulence. From his living room window, Jake watched the early arrivals event staff scurrying, a florist adjusting a stray petal, the caterers polishing silverware. He noted the precise timing of their movements, the synchronized rhythm of their final preparations. His pulse was steady, his gaze unwavering. There was no joy in this, no giddy anticipation of vengeance, just a cold, quiet satisfaction in the execution of a meticulously planned consequence. As the morning progressed, limousines began to pull up, disgorging guests in their finest attire, women in elaborate dresses, men in crisp suits, all exuding an air of self-importance and detached curiosity, eager to witness the spectacle of Chloe Delacroix's extravagant union. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, blooming flowers, and the faint, underlying aroma of fresh soil, soon to be something far less pleasant. Jake remained inside, a silent observer, his focus unwavering from the subtle ticking of the clock on his mantelpiece. Each second brought them closer to the designated hour, closer to the moment his quiet defiance would erupt into an unforgettable, olfactory assault, At precisely 2:15 p.m., the ceremony was set to begin. Jake heard the faint strains of a string quartet warming up. He imagined Chloe, resplendent in white, being escorted down a makeshift aisle carved into his lawn. He pictured Karen, preening, accepting the silent accolades of her peers, basking in the reflection of her daughter's perfect day. At 2:25 p.m., he saw a police cruiser slowly drive past his house, then turn around and park discreetly down the street. Local police, he knew, often kept an eye on large gatherings, especially those involving affluent families. They would be there, a passive presence, witnesses to the unraveling. Then, the moment, 2:30 p.m., a faint, almost imperceptible hiss preceded the chaos. It started innocently enough, a gentle spray from a few sprinkler heads near the edge of the tent. Guests, initially unconcerned, merely shifted their positions, murmuring about an unexpected afternoon shower. But the spray didn't stop. It intensified, the pressure building, the water gaining a sickly, greenish-brown tint. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd as the true nature of the liquid became horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just water, it was thick, viscous, and carried with it an unmistakable, stomach-churning stench that instantly overpowered the delicate scent of roses and expensive cologne. Panic erupted. The silent hiss became a grotesque gurgle, then a full-blown cascade. The underground irrigation system, Jake's grandfather's forgotten masterpiece, roared to life with a vengeance. Every single sprinkler head across the entire grand lawn erupting simultaneously. Streams of foul, brownish-green liquid shot skyward, arcing high into the air before descending in a putrid, disgusting deluge. The pristine white wedding tent was instantly drenched, its fabric turning a sickly yellow-brown, dripping with effluvium. The meticulously arranged floral displays wilted, becoming grotesque, stinking sculptures. The delicate crystal glasses on the tables were filled not with champagne, but with raw sewage. The expensive catering stations, laden with gourmet appetizers, became targets. The vile liquid sprang directly onto platters of shrimp cocktail and bowls of caviar, rendering them inedible and repulsive. Chloe Delacroix, caught mid-vow, shrieked. Her pristine white wedding dress, a symbol of purity and expensive taste, was instantly splattered, transformed into a disgusting, soaked rag. Her carefully styled hair sagged, dripping with the putrid water. Her face contorted in a mixture of disbelief, fury, and sheer, visceral disgust. "My dress! My wedding! What is this?" she screamed, her voice tearing through the chaotic din of gasps and retches. Karen Delacroix, standing proudly beside her daughter, fared no better. Her expensive gown, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, all were instantly saturated. Her face, moments before radiating smug triumph, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She flailed her arms, stumbling backward, her carefully constructed composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. "My God, it's filth! What fresh hell is this?" she shrieked, the words bubbling out through a rising tide of nausea. She looked around wildly, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster. Her eyes darting towards Jake's house, a nascent, terrifying suspicion beginning to form. Greg, the groom, initially looked stunned, then disgusted. He recoiled from Chloe, his carefully pressed suit dripping. He stared at the foul water, then at Chloe's ruined dress, a look of profound discomfort and dawning suspicion spreading across his face. This wasn't just an unfortunate incident. It was a deliberate act, and the immediate proximity to Jake's house couldn't be a coincidence. He looked at Karen, his eyebrows furrowed, a silent question forming in his eyes. "What did you do?" Wedding guests, their faces pale with shock and disgust, scrambled for cover. Women clutched their elaborate hats. Men tried to shield their partners, but there was nowhere to hide. The sprinklers, positioned strategically across the entire lawn, ensured total saturation. Screams mingled with retching sounds, the chaotic symphony of a dream wedding turning into a literal nightmare. Some guests slipped on the slimy, sewage-soaked grass, falling into the foul puddles, their expensive clothes ruined beyond repair. From his porch, where he had subtly positioned himself just moments before the eruption, Mr. Whitaker was in his element, his small camcorder, held steady by years of practice, captured every single, nauseating detail: Chloe's shrieks, Karen's horror, Greg's growing suspicion, the guests scattering like terrified mice, the entire scene awash in a torrent of stinking, brownish-green water. He zoomed in on faces contorted in disgust, on ruined dresses, on the absolute, unmitigated chaos. He had been quietly live-streaming to his Reddit account, titled HOA Horror Stories, and the comments section was already exploding. Screenshots and short clips were being shared instantaneously, going viral with astonishing speed. The internet, true to Jake's prediction, was indeed thirsty for schadenfreude, and Mr. Whitaker was providing a fire hose. The two local police officers, who had initially parked down the street, now cautiously approached, their expressions a mixture of bewilderment and growing distaste. They had been called for a large gathering, perhaps expecting noise complaints, not a biological weapon deployed against a wedding party. They saw the case, the drenched guests, the unmistakable stench, and immediately understood this was no ordinary incident. One officer reached for his radio, but the other, recognizing the sheer scale of the disaster, shook his head. "No, wait, look at this." He pointed to Jake's house, then back to the now soaking tent. The connection was undeniable. They stood, unsure of how to proceed, without a clear crime in progress beyond the gross contamination or a direct complaint from someone willing to identify the perpetrator. Their hands were tied. This was a civil matter, rapidly spiraling into an environmental hazard. More importantly, they quickly realized that Jake, who stood calmly on his porch observing the pandemonium, was clearly the man behind the curtain. But what could they do? He was on his own property, and the wedding party was, illegally, on his property. Karen, finally regaining some semblance of composure amidst the stench and the chaos, pointed a trembling, dripping finger at Jake. "It's him. It's Jake Marshall. He did this. That disgusting man. Arrest him immediately." Her voice was hoarse, her composure shattered, but the fury was unmistakable. Jake, still standing on his porch, a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips, simply met her gaze. He said nothing, his silence more chilling than any shouted accusation. He just watched, his posture radiating a profound sense of vindication. And as the grand lawn at Twin Oaks drowned in its own wretched truth, the initial wave of shock was giving way to outrage, but also to a deeper, more uncomfortable understanding amongst the guests. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. This was a specific, targeted retaliation, and the implications of why it happened were already beginning to ripple through the drenched, stunned crowd. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of utter, putrid chaos. The air hung heavy with the vile stench of sewage, a smell that clung to clothing, hair, and skin, invading every pore. Guests, drenched and disgusted, staggered away from the ruined tent, their expensive attire transformed into clinging, reeking rags. Some tried to wipe themselves with flimsy napkins, only to smear the filth further. Others openly retched, their stomachs unable to cope with the pervasive odor and the horrifying reality of what had just transpired. The meticulously planned grandeur of Chloe Delacroix's wedding had dissolved into a scene of unspeakable squalor. Chloe, her wedding dress now a mottled, brown-stained abomination, continued to shriek, but her cries were drowned out by the rising crescendo of disgust and murmured accusations. "This is insane. I'll sue him and everyone here," she wailed, stamping her foot, a futile gesture that only sent more foul water splashing onto her ruined satin shoes. Greg, the groom, had finally pulled away from her, a look of utter repulsion etched on his face. He wasn't just disgusted by the sewage. A deeper, more unsettling realization was dawning on him. He looked at Karen, whose own face was a mask of furious, disbelieving horror, and the silent question in his eyes was palpable. What did you do to provoke this? The carefully constructed illusion of his future mother-in-law's flawless control was crumbling, replaced by a growing suspicion of her overbearing nature. Karen, though soaked and humiliated, was still capable of a primal, unadulterated fury. She lunged forward, splashing through the muck, pointing a trembling, sewage-soaked finger at Jake. You disgusting, reclusive monster. This is vandalism. This is assault. I will see you jailed for this. Jake Marshall, her voice, usually so clipped and authoritative, was hoarse with rage, her perfect coiffure now a drooping, sodden mess. Jake, from his vantage point on his porch, remained calm, a solitary figure amidst the pandemonium. He finally spoke, his voice clear and surprisingly gentle, cutting through Karen's furious accusations. You trespassed, Karen, repeatedly. You cut my lock. You erected structures on my private property without permission. You called it the Grand Lawn at Twin Oaks. This is my lawn, and it seems my lawn has a rather unique way of expressing its displeasure at being violated. He gestured expansively at the drenched landscape, the ruined tent, the scattering guests. His words, delivered without heat, resonated with an undeniable, chilling logic. The legal grounds were clear. She had trespassed. He was reacting on his own property, albeit in a spectacularly unorthodox way. The two police officers, who had initially hesitated, now exchanged grim glances. They understood the implications. This wasn't a simple act of property damage. This was a direct consequence of a pre-existing dispute, and Karen Delacroix, in her brazen disregard for Jake's rights, had inadvertently created the conditions for her own public humiliation. They approached Jake, but their tone was cautious, almost respectful. Mr. Marshall, we understand there's a history here. However, this is quite extreme. Extreme. Jake raised an eyebrow, a flicker of dark humor in his eyes. Was it not extreme for Mrs. Delacroix to appropriate my property for a private event, to cut my lock, to disregard every boundary I set? I merely responded to an extreme provocation with an equally memorable defense of my property rights. He paused, then added, I'm on my own property, officers. I suggest Mrs. Delacroix and her guests vacate my land immediately before I consider further action. He didn't elaborate on what further action might entail, but the implication hung heavy in the sewage-laden air. Mr. Whitaker, meanwhile, was a one-man media sensation. His live stream had gone viral faster than anyone could have predicted. The comments section was a frenzy of shocked emojis, laughter, and a surprising outpouring of support for the quiet guy who fought back against the HOA. Screenshots of Chloe's ruined dress and Karen's apoplectic face were already circulating widely. The internet loved a good underdog story, especially one involving a tyrannical HOA getting its comeuppance in such a spectacularly messy fashion. Within minutes, local news outlets were calling Mr. Whitaker's phone, tipped off by their social media teams, desperate for footage and interviews. Word of the incident spread like wildfire through the Twin Oaks community. Residents who had quietly endured Karen's petty tyrannies for years suddenly felt a surge of collective satisfaction. Their hushed complaints about her overbearing nature, her arbitrary rules, and her condescending attitude were finally being validated, not just by a single act of defiance, but by a public spectacle of epic proportions. Whispers turned into open conversations, then into outright condemnation. The notion of the Grand Lawn at Twin Oaks became a joke, a symbol of Karen's hubris and her ultimate downfall. Karen, seeing the police seemingly unwilling to immediately arrest Jake and witnessing the horrified faces of her once adoring guests, finally understood the true scope of her defeat. Her power, once absolute, had been utterly decimated. The humiliation was total, irreversible. Her daughter's wedding, The jewel in her crown of suburban triumph was a ruined, stinking mockery. Chloe, now sobbing uncontrollably amidst the filth, clung to Greg, who looked increasingly distant, his face a mixture of pity and profound disappointment. Their future, once so clear, seemed to be dissolving in a pool of putrid water. The HOA, receiving increasingly frantic calls from residents and seeing the viral explosion of the sewage wedding online, was in full damage control mode. Board members, normally eager to support Karen's authoritarian reign, now distanced themselves with astonishing speed. They had turned a blind eye to her transgressions, perhaps even quietly encouraged them. But the public backlash was too severe. Their carefully cultivated image of a harmonious community was in tatters, replaced by headlines of a homeowners association gone rogue, a symbol of tyranny receiving its due, the very foundation of their power. The collective compliance of the residents was now fractured by a torrent of outrage and ridicule. Jake's unexpected, vile revenge had not just ruined a wedding, it had ignited a revolution. The fallout from the great sewage wedding was swift, brutal, and spectacularly public. Mr. Whitaker's Reddit stream, initially a local sensation, exploded into a national phenomenon. News channels, starved for quirky human interest stories, picked it up, transforming Karen Delacroix and her ill-fated nuptials into a viral meme. Clips of Chloe's sewage-soaked dress and Karen's apoplectic face were broadcast on morning shows, late-night comedy skits, and endless social media feeds. The Grand Lawn at Twin Oaks, once a symbol of Karen's aspirational tyranny, became synonymous with her spectacular, self-inflicted humiliation. The Twin Oaks Homeowners Association, facing an unprecedented public relations nightmare, held an emergency meeting. The usually stoic board members, their faces grim, reviewed the mountain of evidence. Mr. Whitaker's damning video, the undeniable fact of Jake's property rights, and the sheer, unmitigated disaster that had unfolded. The calls and emails from residents were overwhelming, a chorus of voices demanding accountability for Karen's overreach. Many had secretly harbored resentments against her for years, and Jake's audacious act had finally given them the courage to speak out. The board, desperate to salvage their reputation and quell the brewing rebellion, had no choice. Karen Delacroix was immediately stripped of her vice presidency and permanently banned from holding any future position within the HOA. A public apology, devoid of genuine remorse but full of legal boilerplate, was issued to Jake Marshall, acknowledging his property rights and the unfortunate events caused by misunderstandings regarding community boundaries. Chloe Delacroix's wedding to Greg was, predictably, postponed indefinitely. Greg, deeply embarrassed and thoroughly discomfited by Chloe's relentless self-pity and Karen's increasingly desperate attempts to shift blame, quietly ended the engagement. The scandal had peeled back the veneer of the perfect suburban life he thought he was marrying into, revealing a toxic core of entitlement and manipulation. He saw the genuine contempt Karen held for boundaries. And the apple, he realized, hadn't fallen far from the tree. Chloe, left without a groom and with a ruined inner reputation, retreated into a self-imposed exile of furious indignation. Her dreams of a lavish society wedding utterly shattered. The image of her drenched, screaming face became a cautionary tale in online forums about bridezillas and overbearing mothers-in-law. Jake Marshall, meanwhile, found his quiet life restored, but not without a newfound respect from the community. The HOA, now under new, significantly more cautious leadership, never bothered him again. In fact, they sent him a fruit basket, a bizarre, awkward gesture of truce. His property, once a battleground, became a monument to a homeowner's defiant stand. Neighbors, who had previously avoided him, now offered hesitant nods, some even stopping to thank him, their expressions a mixture of awe and suppressed amusement. His refusal to conform, once seen as an eccentricity, was now viewed as a principled rebellion. Mr. Whitaker, buoyed by his viral success, became a local celebrity. His Reddit account a hub for HOA reform discussions across the country. He continued to film, but his focus shifted to documenting positive community initiatives and occasionally, still, subtle instances of bureaucratic absurdity. His video, and Jake's quiet, devastating action, became an iconic symbol of the little guy fighting back against perceived injustices. A modern folktale of David versus Goliath, where the sling was an irrigation system and the stone was sewage. Jake spent the weeks following the incident meticulously cleaning his yard, ensuring every trace of the contaminated water was gone. He hired specialists, installed new filters, and even revitalized his grandfather's irrigation system, making sure it was now purely for watering, its dark secret thoroughly purged. The Grand Lawn at Twin Oaks was painstakingly returned to its former state, a green, serene sanctuary. But now it bore a new, unspoken meaning. It was not just a lawn, it was a line drawn in the sand, a testament to the power of personal boundaries. As for Karen Delacroix, her fall from grace was absolute, ostracized by her former social circles, publicly humiliated and stripped of her power. She found herself an outcast in the very community she had sought to control. Her carefully constructed world of appearances had been washed away, not by a flood, ni sun, but by a stream of something far more demeaning. She moved away from Twin Oaks shortly after, a pariah, leaving behind a neighborhood that breathed a collective sigh of relief and a legend that would be whispered for generations. Jake, back to his antique radio equipment and his quiet books, occasionally caught snippets of news about Karen, or saw a new meme featuring the infamous wedding. He never gloated, never boasted. His revenge had been precise, proportional, and ultimately effective. He had defended his home, his peace, and his inherent right to simply be left alone. The Twin Oaks community, once held captive by petty regulations, had learned a valuable lesson about boundaries, respect, and the unexpected. Potent power of a quiet man pushed too far. His house, his lawn, his life, all had been restored, stronger and more independent than ever. And somewhere, deep within the pipes of the old irrigation system, a silent history of retribution lay buried, a permanent testament to the day the lawn fought back. What an unforgettable saga of boundaries crossed and justice served. Jake's stand against the overbearing HOA proved that sometimes the most unexpected solutions deliver the loudest message. Thank you for joining us on this wild ride of suburban drama. If you were shocked by Jake's ingenious revenge, give this video a like, leave a comment with your thoughts on HOA rules, and subscribe for more thrilling stories.